Testing. Does that one work? Oh, yes, it does work. Hi. I want to welcome everybody here tonight to this presentation. My name is Fred Schultz. I'm the City Council member for Ward 6, which is where the Crossroads is situated. And I'm looking forward to tonight's presentation because what you're going to be looking at is a substantially modified version of the of an earlier version of the urban design guidelines. But this version was one that has involved the coordinated work between our staff here in the city of Takoma Park and the planning staff, some of whom are here tonight, of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. And so it is sort of the urban design guidelines draft that's being presented here this evening is a joint effort. And I think I'm very pleased with it. I was part of that joint effort, myself and the Mayor Bruce Williams. We worked on these sort of roundtable meetings for over a number of weeks with the staff, and had a real meeting of minds and a mutual understanding of what needed changing, what needed to stay the same, and every aspect of the urban design guidelines document. So tonight we have from the planning staff at Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Melissa Williams over here and John Marklin, two very experienced and professional people that has been my pleasure to get to know and to work with. And I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to run through pretty much the whole document for the benefit of those who weren't familiar with any of the previous documents on the urban design guidelines, and then talk about how things are different in this version of it and from ones that we were familiar with before. And then we want, absolutely positively want to have comments and questions raised so that we're looking for feedback. That's the reason for this meeting. And positive feedback, negative feedback, ideas, whatever kind of question or thought that you want to share would be greatly valued, because if we hear only silence, then we just don't know what to think, as I'm sure all of us can appreciate. And then during this conversation, we'll talk about where this process proceeds from this point forward. So at that, let me turn it over to Melissa Williams. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you guys for turning out. We were wondering if we were going to get some turnout tonight, so it's good to see all the people here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is the planning framework. And typically what happens is with the design guidelines, they're designed to address urban design concepts that are in the sector plan. And typically there's kind of general design elements that we would have in the sector plan, and then the design guidelines would provide a more comprehensive approach, and we elaborate on some of the earlier concepts. What we have here is the background. So these are basically the touch points in the development process for the guidelines. And as you can see, we actually started our internal process early in 2010. And the City of Takoma Park actually came up with, they had their process, a task force that was put together with stakeholders and representatives from the City of Takoma Park. And there was an urban design task force that was put together. And they were running kind of concurrent processes. We didn't really begin to overlap until much later much later in the process, which was closer to the fall of 2011. And so what you're actually seeing right now is kind of a result of these processes not necessarily intertwining as early as they should. So I guess I wanted to get that out there early. But we are happy that we did end up with a process where everyone was present, and we brought together all of the really great ideas that came from both the separate process that the commission had underway and also the process that involved the city residents and the representatives from the city of Takoma Park. So what you actually see here is that there were revisions that were prepared in fall of 2011, and then what you're looking at today, this is a result of those revisions. And kind of the explanation of the way the process works, just to give you a little more information, typically the sector plan process, it happens. There's a design element in the plan. But typically, the way that we would typically have this process is that in the past, the sector plan would be prepared, and once it was approved and adopted, then we would kind of begin the point of looking at what needs to happen in the design guidelines. The one thing that I kind of wanted to get out there early is that the commission is actually trying to standardize the process so that we were hoping to create a template that we would use for all of the urban design guidelines as we move forward. And so kind of what you had happen here as a result of that process. We were kind of, in the growing stage and trying to figure it out, and we actually did things a little differently here, where we started preparing design guidelines so that they would be presented concurrently with the sector plan. And so that's what you're seeing happening right now. So John is going to actually present to you the revisions to the sector plan, and he's going to discuss a little bit more about the process. And then later on, I will explain to you how what's happening today ties back into the sector plan process.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, I'm going to run through the guidelines. I'm not going to read all the text, because if I do that, we'll be here all night. What I'm going to try to do is, on each page, describe generally the concept behind each idea. And I will point out, Fred indicated that I was going to point out all the changes, but every page I was relating earlier has a change in it. So this whole document has been substantially revised. But what I will do is point out the major changes, the major additions, and the major shifts in focus. So what you see here is table of contents in red are the major things that were added. So gateways and termini, special features, which we'll talk about, and the good neighbor practices, which is actually one of the mayor's idea. It was a very good idea. Okay, the context. As you can see, in white is a sector plan area. In red is Prince George's County, gray is Montgomery County, and the red line is the plan area. It's home to one of the most diverse populations. It's a densely populated, urbanized suburban community of starter homes, garden apartments, apartment towers, and strip shopping centers. And it's centrally located along Maryland's International Corridor. The International Corridor runs along University Boulevard from the north. I think it starts at Pony Branch and it goes down to where the TikTok Liquors is. I think that's I forget the name of the road. I used to go there in college. The vision. Takoma Langley will be a transit-oriented, pedestrian-friendly area that celebrates existing culture. Major elements are gateways, streets and open spaces, good neighbor practices, core and edges. This is Takoma Langley today, looking at the Salt property on University Boulevard. Oh, sorry. And this is what it could look like after Purple Line comes through and new reinvestment takes place. The first major set of ideas are gateways and view termini. We identified primary gateways in red, secondary gateways in a purplish color, pedestrian gateways in yellow. And these are all various ways to enter the study area, the sector plan area. And each one of these areas needs to be marked and indicated. There are also V-termini, which can also be a gateway, but they are interchangeable, but they're not always the same. V-termini are basically something you visually see, but you don't always have to go through or enter like a gateway. And that was actually Alana Blanchard, that was one of her major points. She added that, and she's no longer here with Takoma Park. So these are examples of treatments, gateways and V-termini. A major building, iconic building, can be a gateway, and buildings can also be V-termini. So the top three are gateway-type buildings, and the three are examples of V-termini. A civic building or a civic space can be a gateway. Iconic art can act as a gateway. Iconic art is large scale, producing a striking effect. It's permanent, and it has a uniqueness to the place. Place markers. Those usually take place at the level of pedestrian gateway or a sidewalk experience. And they can be fountains, unique art, little gateways like there in the lower left-hand corner, arbors, etc. Street corners can act as gateways. There are various ways they can be dealt with. They can be a signage corner. They can be have primary, secondary facades. They can be two-sided facades, and they also can be V-termini. So I hope I'm not confusing you. Now, moving on to the next major element, streets and pedestrian experience. This urban design element is composed of 12 subcategories that we identified. And you see them all here. They all make up the experience of somebody walking on the street, mainly. It creates the sense of enclosure, sense of being in a place, not just anywhere, but in a specific city, place that you call your own. The first element is creating a pedestrian-friendly grid and creating a pedestrian realm. This is most important on large, broad streets such as New Hampshire Avenue. You can see it takes place at the interface between the travel lanes in yellow and the smaller, in red is a pedestrian area, which actually includes the service lanes because they're slower traffic and they include bikeways, and you can actually walk in those with a sense of security because the traffic is moving so slow. There's slow traffic and there's parking on it. So that's a realm that we want to create. It's important that the street edge be defined. In blue, there's shows what we want the build-to lines to be. The street edge is defined by build-to lines. Here's an example of it. What a build-to line is the line that you want most all the buildings to come up to create a sense of enclosure. And when you do pull a building back, like in the order, you pull back with intention and create a real space. You don't just pull back for the heck of it because you're trying to fulfill some other needs, such as public use space or create an entry for the building. When it's pulled back, it's done meaningfully. The next element is building form. Buildings need to vary in height to create interest. They should use distinctive materials. And there should be a lot of windows and balconies to create eyes on the street. And lastly, they should strive for imaginative use of tradition or contemporary styles that evoke a look or feel and creates a sense of place for Takoma Park, Takoma Langley Crossroads. Septet. This is something that the staff of Takoma Park asked us to add. Septet is crime prevention through environmental design. It's a standard that people follow. The police departments use it when they analyze spaces. And then composed of these four elements: natural surveillance, natural access control, territorial reinforcement, and maintenance. Natural surveillance as illustrated by the top image, balconies, is really basically eyes on the street. Access control is gates. Territory reinforcements gives you a sense of whose property belongs to who. And then family maintenance, maintaining the property. Broken windows are a great indicator that property is not maintained and it's open to more damage, more invasion. Another element that creates pedestrian room is active street wall, locating sidewalk cafes and main entryways on the street, as well as retail uses. The next element is parking. Vehicles should access parking structures from alleys or side streets where possible, and that's in the CR zone. Parking garages should be lined with retail, and the lower left-hand image is a parking garage above with retail on the ground floor. And you should allow on-street parking to help slow traffic and provide parking choices for consumers and shoppers. So as you're driving into a retail area, the first choice often is on-street parking. And if you can't find it in front of the store you're going to, then the next step is parking garage. So those are the choices I'm talking about. Building signage. They should be artistic, integrated with the architecture, and complement the architecture. And you see these examples here. Some are from D.C., some are from Charlottesville. They're all local. And these were images that we provided as well as Takoma Park. Private streets. There should be opportunities to create a private street. They should have a look and feel similar to a regular street, but they can be more flexible in dimension, design, and programming. They can be closed to allow temporary expansions, say during festivals or farmers markets. They can have depressed curbs to allow to allow people to flow, to basically create a sense of the whole street is one big sidewalk. And underground utility should be undergrounded. Green streets. The top three images are green street treatments on commercial streets, and the bottom three are on residential streets. Okay, and finally, the International Corridor. As I mentioned earlier, the International Corridor runs from Piney Branch down to Prince George's County, and it's mentioned in 3 or 4 plans. And what we're asking in this plan is to create designs, or applicants to create designs that include signage, art, streetscape that celebrates the community's history and international diversity. Okay, the next big urban design concept are open spaces. There are 3 levels of open spaces. There's large open spaces. One's a civic green. Should be between 1/2 and 1 acre. It should include a significant green area, and it should include art. And it's located where the Saul property is. You see in the map there. And it could be one of several different layouts and configurations. Next large green space is on the other side of the on New Hampshire Avenue, and it has very similar details and features. It should be 1/2 to 1 acre, primarily green, open to a public right-of-way, and be visible and accessible to adjacent buildings. The main difference between this one and the other one, this would be a private green space. And the next level is small urban spaces. These are between 1/8 to 1/4 acre in size, and they're noted in yellow here. They should be intentional, activated, include street furnishing, combine landscape and hardscape, and should be open to the street. Okay, this next element is something that the city asks us to include, special features. This slide shows fountains, artwork, thematic streetscaping, and the City of Takoma Park's wayfinding system was added. Street furnishings and these are the bottom images are of the city of Takoma Park's street furnishings. And this next element was the idea of the mayor's. He suggests that we illustrate all these ideas with the good neighbor practices. So these, there's 9 of them, and we'll go through them. First one is locate HVAC units on the roof, screen dumpsters, access parking and loading areas off of alleys, and the sidewalk should be wide enough to accommodate 3 pedestrians walking side by side or a wheelchair. And place drive-throughs behind the buildings. And the next slides will illustrate that further. And all those ideas are already encouraged by the CR zone. The 6th practice. Number 6, screen between parking and sidewalks. Consolidate garbage and recycling. Private courts and entryways should be visible from public spaces. And access to parking, loading off of areas shared by adjacent properties. And here's an example. When you're walking down a sidewalk next to a parking lot, the views of the cars should be screened either by a hedge or a wooden fence, but it shouldn't be so tall that you can't see over it. Yes?
Is there anything in these about surface parking versus under building parking, whether it's subterranean or ground level, a few stories? I have heard all the arguments how about more costly that is to build, but all the same.
The slide earlier, we talked about parking and placing parking in mid-block. I'm not sure I made that clear. The design guidelines will have more text, and we'll explain that. But regarding whether it's a structured parking or surface parking underground, that's entirely up to the economics of the project. So that's up to the developer. If he feels, if the developer comes in and wants to, say, take a large strip mall and build a project, if he can afford to put the parking underground, more power to him. But my guess is because of the zoning here, the height, the densities, they probably won't do it. Usually we have 100-foot heights as maximum, just certain areas right up against University Boulevard. Everything steps down. And to be able to afford to do a parking garage underground, he's got to have more height to do that.
I also, my screening between the parking and the sidewalks is far better, I would think, for the parking to be behind buildings, and in fact having parking on the street next to the sidewalk kind of undercuts one of the things that you had earlier. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough to point directly to it.
No, that's a good point. Sorry.
Street.
Well, the CR zone says to put the parking behind the building, okay? But you can't always do that because you're not going to always have buildings on all 4 sides of the block. Let me back up. I'll show you. I'm sorry. You see, the next block up, there's no parking on the street. So this image shows varying levels of how the CR zone would be built out. Not everybody's going to build out according to the top block. You can see it's cut off there. In many cases, they're going to build out the way you're showing here. So wherever there is parking, we ask them to put it behind, where possible, put it behind the building. When it's next to a street, in this case, they're side streets, we ask it to screen this way. So ideally, what you're talking about, putting it always behind a building or in a mid-block parking structure, that's the ideal, but it's not always going to happen. And if we mandate that, then nothing's going to get built because it's not practical. Sure. that's covered by the CR zone, and the CR zone allows, and correct me if I'm wrong, that puts when you're next to transit, I think it's within a quarter mile, you can do you're only allowed to do the maximum required, excuse me, the minimum. So you can't go above the minimum. Okay, and then there are several, depending on what you're offering, ways of getting the parking down. So in some cases, you can get it down to half required parking or 3/4. Does that answer your question? I got to pull the CR zone out. I haven't looked at it in a while, but the CR zone makes significant steps towards reducing parking. Okay. Okay, we already went through this. So there's two ways of doing screening between parking, and one on the right is a hedge, and the other one is a well-built fence. What we don't want to see were these inappropriate examples like barbed wire or jersey barriers or this chain link fence with slats in it. So what the city's looking for and what the Parking Planning Commission is looking for is quality screening materials. So consolidate trash and recycling in one dumpster area. Private entryways should be visible from the sidewalks. And finally, access to parking and loading off of areas should be shared by adjacent properties. So in this example here on the lower left, the loading and parking is shares at one alley in their different properties. The next big urban design concept was the core. And we identified the core area as a crossroads in this oblong elliptical shape. It is where the gateway, the view terminated pedestrian experiences, open spaces, and amenities should be experienced at their greatest intensity. This is where this all happens. And there's a lot of text here. But the core as a whole in the crossroads. What we've done here is taking a conceptual plan of what the crossroads might look like and overlaid on existing. So as you can see, we brought the buildings up to the street, and we eliminated the hot rights, which is these basically these sort of highway ramps. Makes it very difficult to cross because usually when you're driving, you're looking for the oncoming traffic, and you don't see the person trying to get across. It's very dangerous for pedestrians. So my ideas include a public plaza at the corner, creating gateway, marking the corner with iconic art. The next idea is to concentrate development at the core. So this is another view of that SketchUp model I showed you earlier. And the development concentrates in the middle and steps down to the surrounding residences. And the buildings in the back are next at the CR zone with all the parking in the middle, buildings up to the street. And what's in the foreground is the intermediate development that could happen following the CR zone. So the idea is that pedestrian on the street will still have a good human experience, a good pedestrian experience. He won't be walking next to seas of parking when he's in this area. And the idea is over time, these interior parking lots can be built out. Edges. The transition should be ensured through clustering and higher density development around transit stations, stepping down building heights, and the sidewalks with the landscape strip between the sidewalk and the curb rather than tree boxes. So as you get closer to the residences, instead of having these little tree grates in a sidewalk, if a long green strip that's 5 or 6 feet wide, it's more residential, more green. And this slide shows where the transitions between the CR zone and existing residential exist and what should happen. Buildings should only be 40 feet high for the first 25 feet of a building's depth, and that's on Kennewick, Ann Street, Hammond Street. Yeah, I'm going to show you in a minute. Okay, this is Ann Street, what it looks like today. This is what it could look like. So that's a transition. So you see the building height is about 40 feet. You have the green strip. You have sidewalks. The building is stepped back about 15, 20 feet. A little front yard. So it's more residential feeling for those building existing homes on the other side of the street. This is Hammond Street today. That's what it could look like. Mr. Teague?
About 10 feet. So I'm very confused.
40 feet is the height.
I know, and this talks about 10 feet above the average height of surrounding properties, which I don't know what that is.
Zoning 35.
What are you referring to? Are you looking at the CR zone? Or?
Well, I know, but isn't that... I'm trying to understand right here, this bullet.
First 25 feet.
I mean, it's not necessarily not 40 feet. It's 10 feet higher than the average height of the surrounding properties, which I'm not sure what that means.
Can we address that after the presentation?
Yeah, I guess I just was confused because you were talking about that very point, and you're talking 40 feet, and now this is something else, and I wasn't sure whether one was going to govern and one wasn't.
Oh, yeah. 40 feet was the maximum allowed.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you tell how you would determine the average height of surrounding properties, per chance?
That's from languages from the CR zone.
Okay,
So
doesn't matter where it's from, I just...
Do you want to?
Right now, what we're thinking would happen would be that if someone were to come in with a development plan, they would actually have to provide that information. And typically, they have to do something very similar to that as a part of the preliminary plan or site or project plan review process. So the thought is that they would have to provide the average height of the properties that would be adjacent or confronting the site that they're looking to develop, and then that way they would come up with kind of a maximum height that they could use when they're confronting residential properties. Now, the 40 feet that John is actually showing is based on a conversation that we had with the City of Takoma Park, where the thought was they didn't want anything taller than a 40-foot height where they confronted residential. So this language is very specific to Takoma Park. The language in the design guidelines is specific to the zone, which means that it can change if it's in another area where they don't have kind of this maximum height limit.
So these guidelines would apply only here, but the zone could be...
Right. What you have is you have the language from the CRT zone, which would be the same language that would be applied across the county. And what's happened is with the City of Takoma Park, they had kind of additional restrictions that they wanted to have placed. And so that's why we have a situation where you're looking at a maximum of 40 feet on these streets, because that was something specific to the City of Takoma Park.
But which would govern?
What's going to govern is the language that's in the guidelines, the language that's specific to the City of Takoma Park, because we've actually incorporated that language into the sector plan, where we talk about the maximum heights on some of these streets.
So I understand the maximum would govern, but that doesn't mean somebody couldn't say that this language means 30 feet. And so I guess I'm trying to understand.
If someone comes in and they want to actually go lower, they can. What we're saying is that they can't go taller. They can't go higher than 40 feet. If a developer says, well, you know what, I don't want the 40, I'll take the 35, that's fine.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand, this language would imply that some other lower standard could be the maximum.
That language, because it's from the zone, is something that's what the zone says. The language that we've agreed upon with the City of Takoma Park would govern the development within the City of Takoma Park. So when they were reviewing this, they would actually look at what the master plan, what the sector plan says, and what the design guideline says.
Okay, and I'm saying if they're in conflict, then
But I don't necessarily, I don't think you're going to end up with a situation where they're in conflict, but if it is the case, what will happen is we'll have John take another look at it. He can sit down with the people in development review, and he can make sure that that's not going to be a problem. But right now, what we're believing and what we're thinking is going to happen in the city of Takoma Park is that the 40 feet is actually sufficient.
Can I ask the question a different way? If the CRT zone height requirements are more restrictive than the 40 feet that are in the sector plan and the urban design guidelines, the CRT zone restrictions would be applied, correct?
They should be, but I guess the question that you're asking is that the way that the language was written, and you should not end up having a restriction where it's going to be lower than the 40 feet. The 40 feet that you guys have actually requested should be lower than what the zone would allow, is I guess the point that I'm trying to make. Based on the preliminary analysis that they did when they wrote that language, they were under the impression that it would be higher than the 40 feet, I guess is kind of where I'm going. I don't think we're going to be able to answer that question for you guys tonight and give you kind of a definitive answer. What I will do is John and I will go to the office tomorrow, and we'll sit down with Josh Sloan, who actually wrote it, and we'll sit down with the person who typically reviews the development plans for Takoma Park, and we'll look at the 3 streets that are actually involved in kind of this discussion, and we'll confirm that the 40 feet is okay. If it's not, it's something that we can change.
I think what Neil is trying to get at is that it's quite possible here on Hammond that if you average all of the houses, because there are some 1-stories and 2-stories,
Right.
you come up with an average that's, say, 28 feet or 26 feet. Does that mean the lot across is restricted to 36 feet?
The way
That's
that
what
the way that the language is written now, that would be the case.
Okay.
And if it turns out that that is the case, what we were saying is the maximum is 40.
Okay. But
If
it could be lower.
It could be lower.
Right.
But we'll address it, and we'll take another look at it.
All right, this is our second to last slide. This is County Avenue today. On the right, okay, on the right is the beautiful Saw property, the waiting area. On the left are the R30 apartment buildings. And this is where it could look, going to the CR zone, the sector plan and design guidelines. So that's the appropriate transition. And the next slides are resources. Now we'll officially open up to questions.
How does the zoning ordinance rewrite that's currently underway for the next couple of years affect all of this?
Lucy, you want to take that one?
I will do my best to answer this, but neither one of us are kind of the professionals when it comes to the zoning code rewrite. But my understanding is that the CR zones will actually be they won't be rewritten. They're actually being incorporated into the new zones that are being produced. So everything that's being zoned right now, CR, CRT, CRN, those will be rolled into the zoning code rewrite.
Right,
So there won't be any changes
These
here.
won't change. This will be part of that rewrite. It's all those old zones that are out there that haven't looked touched for 50, 60 years.
I think one of the things that I want to see displayed and explain is that during the rewrite of this urban design guidelines, one of the things that was decided was that there were certain items that had been in earlier versions of the urban design guidelines that we sort of collectively felt were of such importance that they really needed to be elevated up to and to the level of the sector plan, such that they would actually have more enforcement strength. And I'd like you to see if you could sort of walk us through some of that without having to go into the whole sector plan itself.
Okay. Sliding out. Okay. Actually, what ended up happening is there were the two resolutions that were prepared. So we're talking, for people that weren't familiar, there's Resolution 2011-53, and that's the resolution, the city's resolution that dealt with the sector plan. And what we did is we basically accepted the language that the city put forth. We did make some minor edits for clarity, and we included some additional language where we felt that some things kind of needed to be explained a little further. So I can actually go through that really quickly and give you an idea as to the language that was added to the sector plan. And one of those kind of dealt with the idea of sidewalks and landscape tree strips being a certain width. What the city requested was that sidewalks and tree strips, in the sector plan area be 15 feet wide, with the exception of University Boulevard, which needed to be 25 feet wide, with shade trees 20 to 25 feet on center, and designed in accordance with locally adopted streetscape standards. So that's pretty much a mouthful, but we agreed. What we said was that we agreed with that language. We also included information about the public improvement easement, and basically that's an easement that we have on University Boulevard and New Hampshire Avenue that allowed us to provide kind of the additional streetscaping elements, which were the wider sidewalks and the tree panels and some stormwater infrastructure. And so what we did is we said that all of this would be included within the public improvement easement, and it would be in accordance with adopted streetscape standards. Right now, the plan does not have They don't have streetscapes. There aren't streetscape standards that have actually been developed for this plan. But we did agree that something like that would happen in the future, and that once that did occur, that what would happen in the public improvement easement would have to be in accord with those decisions, with those streetscape standards. And we also talked about, because we do share University Boulevard with Prince George's County, we also talked about that these things also had to be in accord with what Prince George's County was doing on their side of University Boulevard as well. There was also a recommendation that there should be a shared use pathway along University Boulevard with the construction of the Purple Line, and that the streetscaping should occur there as well, along with the cycle track. The staff, we agreed with that. We talked about the fact that University Boulevard is wholly within Prince George's County, and since the cycle track would actually be a part of the right-of-way, that we would actually have to refer to the language in the Prince George's County sector plan. One of the major elements, we talked about designing buildings that enhance the pedestrian experience, community identity, and the viability of the commercial district. And there was quite a bit of language that was prepared for that, so I don't necessarily want to read through all of that, but it dealt with articulation of the buildings, emphasizing the corners, highlighting entrances, transparency, material selection. Some of the stuff you actually do see included as a part of the design guidelines, but once again, we accepted the language that the City of Takoma Park produced. And so we were pretty much okay with that. There was something about transitions. One of the things that the city wanted to see was that there was gradual transitions in massing heights, uses, and densities were ensured between the three districts that were designated in the sector plan, and there were strategies that were listed as to how that could happen. And we talked about the most intense uses facing University Boulevard, New Hampshire Avenue, the private streets, citing buildings that face residential zoning with front yard setbacks that mimic the setbacks across the street. John actually did include graphics that showed how that would work out, so that reflects the language that we're going to include in the plan. Screening parking structures, and also stepping up heights. And this gets back to the language that Neil was inquiring about. This is the language that's actually being included in the plan. It says step-up heights facing residentially zoned land by limiting the first 25 feet of such buildings to no more than 10 feet more than the average height of the facing or adjoining properties. So this is language that is also reminiscent of the language that's in the zone. It was language that the City of Takoma Park felt that needed to be in the plan, and it's also reflected in the design guidelines. Finally, let's see here, we talked about coordinating with the City of Takoma Park and Prince George's County to prepare and adopt distinctive streetscape standards. That's actually one of the bigger elements that needed to be included in the plan, because that's a work program element. The way that the council, the way that the process works with the commission is that the council would actually have to give us permission to undertake something like that. And so there would have to be a formal request to the county council to kind of appropriate monies and technical resources for that to occur. But what we did put in the plan is we basically agreed that streetscape standards are necessary for this area, and that they should be coordinated between the county, the city, and Prince George's County as well. So we have language in the plan that basically says that upon approval and adoption of the sector plan, that there should be a coordinated effort to prepare and adopt distinctive standards that visually unite the Takoma-Langley crossroads and provide enhancements for pedestrians, bicycle, and transit users, and also incorporate a streetscape that is located between the build-to or the back edge of the sidewalk and curb. So it's a very specific recommendation that not only talks about producing streetscapes, but also exactly where the streetscape should lie in relation to the buildings. So what's happened with this is this was transmitted to the county council in October, and right now it's sitting with the rest of the sector plan. Where the sector plan is right now is that because there were resolutions submitted by the City of Takoma Park, one that dealt with the guidelines and one that dealt with the sector plan, there was a decision that was made that these things needed to be kind of cleaned up before the council would move forward. And so what they're waiting to do is they're waiting to kind of get an approved set of design guidelines before they're going to continue the sector plan process. So right now we have the resolution that was prepared by the city, the response, which basically accepts the recommendations of the city's resolution to the sector plan. Those are actually in the hands of the county council right now. We don't have a new date. The plan is still within the Fed right now. So what they're waiting on us to do is to have a set of approved urban design guidelines, and then we would transmit that to the council, and at that point they would determine what the next step would be with the sector plan. It would either be an additional Fed work session, or it could just be sent straight to the council for approval of the sector plan, to the full council, I'm sorry, for approval of the sector plan. And so that's kind of where we are in the process right now. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
It answers it for me. I'll leave it to everybody else.
Were there any-
Decide whether it answers it for them.
Any additional questions about the sector plan or the sector plan process? Maybe? No? Okay. Any questions about the design guidelines?
I didn't really come here to harp on this one thing, but I do have one question related to this average building heights. The average height is in the sector plan, or it's in the guidelines? That's what I'm confused about.
That language is based upon language that's actually in the zone.
Okay.
And so what we've done is we've actually added this, that statement is also in the sector plan now, where it talks about building height. And because he's allowed to kind of provide more information in the design guidelines, we, based on the conversations that we've had with the City of Takoma Park, there was a determination that the maximum height that anyone would like to see on Hammond and in Kennewick would be 40 feet.
Yeah. And I guess the issue, I know, by the way, I'm not thinking about doing any development anytime soon, but the issue I always look for is ways to avoid conflict with neighbors, and I think a straight number is much better for everybody. I like the 40 feet's fine. But I do like this language because somebody's going to come in and argue it should be 39.5, and we'll spend a lot of time and energy looking at something. If you just had a flat, this is it, 40 feet, and got rid of this language, I would be much happier, because I think this is the kind of language that people with their neighbors spend endless hours fussing over. You know, will you go to the top of the chimney? What do you do at the top of the antenna? And on and on and on.
Right.
And to me, it creates problems rather than solves them. And I think simple, understandable guidelines are much better. So whether in this case, if it's in the sector plan, it's too late. But I would much prefer a hard number that everybody can understand and go with it.
Okay. What I will say, just to kind of give you this response to the resolution, nothing has been done with it other than it's been delivered to Marlene Michelson, who's the legislative analyst for the council. So we still have the process of where, because it's the council's plan, it's no longer the commission's plan or the community's plan even at this point. You still have that process where she's going to look at all of the information that she has, and she may have additional language. She could accept this as written, or she could have some additional thoughts. What I will say is the process doesn't necessarily end for the community. If you feel strongly about something like that, you do have an opportunity to kind of present something to the council where you say, you know, you don't necessarily believe that that language, this is the best place for that sort of specific language, you know, based on the argument that you just presented today. So I don't want you to leave here and think that you don't have an opportunity to still present your concerns, because you do. I just want to make it clear that you would be presenting your concerns to the council rather than the planning commission with regards to the sector plan.
You call this confronting, right?
Yes.
When it's right across the street from housing. What is the standard height that you set in plans outside of Tacoma? Like if Tacoma Park City hadn't asked for 40 feet?
We would have just gone with what the zone said. So it would have just been pretty much the language that I read that talked about the average height. I mean, you can always, I know that in Kensington they had some specific language where they dealt with their transition. So I know that different communities deal with it differently. It really depends on whether the goal was to kind of see development that kind of tied into what was there, or was the thought that they just really wanted to just, you know, have wholesale redevelopment, and they were thinking that this was a way to kind of get the investment they were looking for. So, I mean, transitions, how communities feel about transitions kind of depends upon the character of the community, the personality of the community. So, any additional questions? Design guidelines, timeline, sector plan?
Yeah, as the awards representative here, you know, I feel the weight on me of making sure that the concerns that you have get delivered clearly to you guys, and to the planning board and to the county council. Mr. Teague's suggestion, I think, is a sensible one. I know that Neil has spent a good deal of time having conversations with residents across the street from his property. I mean, not just across the street, but in adjacent streets. And it may indeed be a better solution to have a specific number for the reasons that he said. It may, in fact, increase, the 40 feet may work out to be a little higher than the 10 feet above current heights, but I don't think in the long run it would be that perceptible.
Okay.
So let's think about that.
Okay.
I do want to say, to reaffirm what Melissa Williams just said, is that contrary to what Neil, you said or speculated, is that the sector plan is not adopted. It's still subject to change. And the reason for that is that the city insisted that because of the changes because of the fact that we were changing the urban design guidelines, which then in turn could change the sector plan, we asked the county council not to adopt either of them until we were satisfied with both of them.
Right.
And I think that, and you said that in your introductory remarks, is that these two documents will be adopted when they are adopted concurrently.
Right.
And that way we will know that where the controls are, and that nothing has been omitted because somebody said, oh, well, we thought that was going to be in the sector plan or something like that. So I just want to make that clear. Now, can we talk a little bit about, I guess, the next stage in this process here is the January 23rd meeting of the City Council, where at the present time the rolling agenda shows the City Council adopting a resolution basically in support of the urban design guidelines and the sector plan as amended.
Okay.
Now, I'm not certain that that's exactly what will happen. I want to make sure that if changes are developed in the meantime between now and then, either from this conversation or subsequent, emails or letters or stuff like that that we receive, or any comments that might come up at the meeting on the January 20th, the council meeting on the 23rd, that resolution or action can accommodate those changes. I don't want anybody to feel that we're rushing this process, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we move forward in a deliberate fashion. As we set out these dates, and I'd like to be able to stick to them because that's what the community is counting on. But so it's a question of kind of moving forward here as quickly as we can, but as slow as we must, to make sure that we've heard some things. So I just want to make sure that everybody's real clear. That's why I'm saying what I'm saying right now.
I know where the design guidelines are. So I think
I know, I've seen the draft of the design guidelines because it was posted. I'm still slightly unclear on where the redraft of the sector plan is available to look at this point.
There has not been a redraft of the sector plan. What we do have is the staff response to the resolution.
Right.
And so the reason that there hasn't been a redraft is we'd actually gone through 3 work sessions. So there was a ton of testimony at those work sessions, and as a result, there were substantial changes to the sector plan. That is something that, because it's a council document and not a commission document, what has to happen is that they would actually type up a list that would show kind of all of the changes that would be made to the sector plan, and it would include the language that we've sent up as well.
You're saying so it may include other things from other...
It may include, there will definitely be things other than just the things that the City of Takoma Park has requested. And so what happens in the process is once the council has actually made all of the changes that they want to make to that document, then they send it back to the commission, we incorporate all the changes, and then the final draft is presented. So there is, in fact, an interim draft between what's presented for the council's public hearing and when it's finally adopted.
So maybe this isn't my place, but Fred, on the 23rd, the city's not going to be taking an action regarding a sector plan that they haven't seen. On the presumption that the sector plan will conform at some future point in time.
yes, and we will have our
When I say we, the City of Takoma Park and its citizens will have a shot directly with the county council to seek
Okay, then, I assume that. I guess I kept looking for the sector plan to review, and it's just not there. Okay.
Yeah, it's not there, but the one thing that I did want to state is that we pretty much dealt with, I would say, 95% of the sector plan in the work sessions. The only thing that we were actually waiting on was, in fact, the design guidelines. So, not that that means that it's going to help you unless you were actually keeping track of all of the changes that happened during the work session. I can tell you that because we were privy to those changes, that as best we could when we were having our roundtable discussions, we did try and make sure that anything that would have had an impact to some of the desires of the city of Takoma Park as it related to kind of design standards and streetscape standards, we did bring that up, that this was a change that either someone at the county council had requested or something that was a result of testimony. We did kind of put that out as a part of our discussion so that we were trying to prevent as having conflicting recommendations or language that would conflict with the ultimate sector plan that the council would produce.
I just want to say I'm glad you're here tonight. Seriously, because I know that you're, in effect, speaking for Bob Harris as well as Bob Wolf. Mr. Harris represents, for those who don't know, Walgreens, which owns the 10-acre tract on the east side of New Hampshire Avenue, and Bob Wolf is the senior vice president with B.F. Saul Company. And they've all, three of them have been active in following the evolution of the CR zoning process, which has been formally adopted, the sector plan, and the urban design guidelines, and have encouraged their participation, because when the city says to the county council, we like the urban design guidelines and want us to be able to say that that the we is the broadest possible we that we can have. I just don't want saying, well, it's just the residents of Ward 6 who think it's great,
Right.
but the developers are pounding their heads, and so that's been an important consideration for me.
Okay?
Please.
Yes.
I'm not familiar with the whole process and what points different entities become involved.
Okay.
When does the State Highway Administration become involved in terms of designing the roadway and pedestrian access, bike access?
Well, I can tell you that we worked very closely with SHA and DOT. We worked with all of the transportation agencies as a part of the process. And I can say that this is probably the sector plans that involved the purple line, I think, were handled a little differently, because we did have access to kind of everyone that needed to be in the room when you're talking about transportation, when you're talking about streets and rights-of-way. They were all present because of the purple line being kind of a key component. So we actually had sessions with them from the beginning, from the onset of the plan process. And we made sure that everything that we recommended in both the plan and in the design guidelines, we got their approval before we even put it in. And so there was a lot of negotiating that had to happen in order to get some of these non-traditional treatments that you would see as a result of if this is built out. Some of the stuff that you're going to see is actually a little different than what you would typically get in Montgomery County, and a lot of it was because we were successful in getting the right people in the room. But, I mean, we had, when I say everyone from, SHA, DOT, MTA, we had pretty much all of the transit agencies there. There were WSSC reps there. I mean, so everyone kind of came together to make sure that we weren't doing anything. Honestly, I think they came sure to make sure we didn't do anything that jeopardized the purple line, but it was also an opportunity for us to kind of throw out our ideas to get some of the things that we wanted. One example would be the cycle track. The cycle track is something that is was not done in Montgomery County. It originated here. It was a recommendation from the city of Takoma Park, and it was something that we fought long and hard to get included as a part of this process. And Prince George's County actually bought in as well, so they're incorporating that sort of bicycle facility into the Prince George's County plan as well. So now you're actually seeing the concept of the cycle track. It's showing up in other Montgomery County sector plans. So.
I can speak loud. A couple weeks ago, they had the neighborhood meeting for the Purple Line stop there. They were still showing the right turn ramp there. They kind of implied like they knew that it had to go away, but you're saying, from your point of view, they've agreed to not do that?
Are you talking about kind of the hard right? What the sector...
University East to New Hampshire South. That was the first one.
The sector plan actually recommends that goes away. And so we've talked to them about it. They've pretty much gotten on board with that. What happens is there's going to be a staging process. And so a lot of the amenities and the changes that you would actually see with regards to the streets and the right-of-way would be phased in. And so what you're going to see is that some things will actually show up in one phase of the Purple Line, and then they'll disappear upon complete build-out. A perfect example, like going back again to the idea of the cycle track. In one phase of the Purple Line, it's a shared use path or a sidewalk. And then what ends up happening is that once the Purple Line is constructed, that becomes the cycle track, and then the sidewalk is actually part of this kind of 15-foot public improvement easement. So that was one of the ways that we were able to accommodate a lot of the things that we wanted to do differently in this community.
I don't think this is part, I think it'll be in future planning for Purple Line and with SHA, but since we're talking about that, I'm still just putting down a marker that I'm concerned on what they're actually going to do with left turns, not so much right turns. Because left turns that have to cross the track, they're going to want to finish. And if you look at the four corners of this intersection, 3 of them have commercial or unofficial road. They have ways to dogleg. And when I started in this process too long ago, 2009 or so, they wanted to use Hammond behind Neal's property for all the left traffic from northbound New Hampshire to University, which is a quite busy left turn. And that ultimately is the part that is really going to concern Takoma Park, because a traffic engineer is going to look and say, oh, we'll go left at Holton or Hammond and go through the neighborhood. And that is going to be a real stickler with the train thing. But I don't think it's really part of this. I'll be at those meetings.
I would definitely tell you to come at the meetings. Right now, they're still in final engineering. So, I would say that as concerns, if you have concerns about things like that are more of a Purple Line issue, as a community, you can definitely bring those forward. I mean, we're actually still seeing changes to the functional master plan. Well, changes that would have to be, would require that the functional plan be amended as a result of kind of final engineering and different things that communities are kind of realizing that, whoa, this isn't going to be good for us, and you need to find another solution. So I would definitely say as things come up, I would definitely, organize yourselves as a community, and, you've got Fred Schultz here who has no problem in getting Mike Madden to the table. So, it was...
Well, I was going to say, I think that left turn has to stay, because that's the way buses get in the bus garage, the way it's explained to me. But it's a good point, just keep following them, bugging them. So.
Yeah, I would definitely say. I know what concept she's actually referring to, and that was when we were talking about the Jersey Junction. There was an idea initially about alleviating congestion at the intersection. And so initially there was a thought based on the traffic counts and some of the proposed development that the intersection would fail, and as a result we had to come up with kind of some very strategic ways to move traffic through the intersection in order to allow for the additional density that the sector plans were recommending. And then further analysis actually showed that we did not need to make as many of those movements as we thought. And so we're actually, we had to have a pair. And I guess to kind of give you further insight is we had 2 pairs of left turn movements that would alleviate the pressure on the intersection. And we actually realized that we didn't need all 4. You only needed to have 1 pair. And so the pair that actually ended up remaining in the plan, even though they're not identified as jug handles, the movements would actually be through the Walgreens property and then one that actually uses an existing street. So we kind of looked at the idea of not having those movements go through predominantly residential areas in either Montgomery County or Prince George's County. And so I guess the one thing that I did want to leave you guys with is just reminding you that this is kind of half of a plan. It started off as a bi-county effort with both Prince George's and Montgomery County. And so if you were to actually look at the final document, will make reference to Prince George's County quite a bit. And so not only will you need to have a copy of the design guidelines and the Takoma Langley sector plan for Montgomery County to understand what's happening in this community, I would strongly suggest that you get a copy of the Prince George's County plan as well. Because the way that we treated this, even though we did separate the 2 planning efforts, the transportation recommendations, the environmental recommendations, and the land use recommendations are all shared. So we do have consistently through the plans, you will see where there'll be points where it says, please refer to Prince George's County plan, and we're hoping to actually have links in the electronic documents where you'd actually be able to click online and it would take you directly to that section. And then there will probably be some language in the design guidelines as well, ultimately when it's done, that would refer you, particularly when you're talking about University Boulevard, you're going to have to refer to the Prince George's County sector plan in order to have kind of the breadth of all the information that you would need. So I guess if there aren't any additional questions, once again, I would like to thank all of you guys for showing up, and I hope we educated you on what it is that we're doing as it relates to the design guidelines. So I hope you left with more information than you came in here with.